Okay.
Another way, which Sheree mentioned, was to work on your music theory is you could compose.
Yes.
So how does that help your music theory or your understanding?
Well, I think for composing, first, you're learning the language of music. Therefore, you have to be surround yourself with a lot of music so that you can start picking up those nuances. And so, at a very young age for me, I started composing music on my own, and I never really published it because I was just a kid. And
Should bring it back.
well, you know what?
When's the album coming out?
I still have that manuscript.
There you
I still
go.
have it at home.
Dust it off. Anyway,
So yeah, so how it inspired me to compose, it's really because I was influenced by a lot of music that I listened to, and so
but like when you compose, what do you learn by composing?
what are you learning from composing?
Yeah, what do you
you're
learn?
well, you're learning about the form of the piece, and so basically, before Matt was talking about how you write down the 1 chord and the 4 chord and the 5 chord, and that would be for the blues. And basically, the 1 chord can go anywhere it wants. And then from there, you have to be careful because if you go from 1 chord, you go to 6 chord. From the 6 chord, you could go to the 2 chord. And from the 2 chord, you can go to 5, and then you can go to 1 that way. But so
Why don't you go from the 1 to the flat 7?
I think you can do that.
Of course you can.
Yeah. So anyway, the 1 chord can go anywhere it wants, but then from there, it's a little bit tricky. So there is the formula that you can follow to create this composition according to that formula to make it sound very classical. But in today's world, a lot of musicians, they like to experiment with different chords, and we as classically trained musicians, we call that music as a contemporary period music.
Sure. Well, look, there's all different kinds of music, all different kinds of writing methods. But I think the thing is, when you write music, you have to think about what you're doing. You have to think about the musical entities that you're using.
Obviously, but you also need to know how the chords work.
Well, you do, but that's what you'll learn as you write. So if you've never written music before and you're a little overwhelmed by that, the thing is, look at it like a learning experience. Writing out some chord progressions. If you know the chords in a key, you have access to essentially 7 chords, probably more like 6 or what's used in popular music. And just writing out progressions, and you'll actually learn about how chords work moving from one chord to another. Some chords sound better moving from one chord to another.
Right.
Some chords sound stronger. Some are weaker movements, depending on where they are.
Right.
But when you do that, you learn about that. And then, when you see them in music, you understand, I understand why this chord goes to this chord or how this, how this verse works. Or, maybe the verse is in a minor tonality and then the chorus is in a major tonality, but they're really all in the same key. But point being is when you write, you'll learn about how those things work. And writing music is not like you have to write, a masterpiece or you have to write a hit song. You don't have to do that.
But even for today's hit songs, they're so simple. It's so simple.
I mean, yeah, the chord progressions are really simple.
Very, very simple.
But then I think there's the other side of it is like, the chord progression is simple, but then you look at all the other aspects of what we call as the arrangement.
Right.
What's happening with the drums, what's happening with the vocals, or what's happening with the keyboard parts, or where is the space of everything? That's the arrangement side. Mm-hmm. So thinking about that, then you understand how the different components of the instruments play a role in that, or if it's a classical piece, the arrangement of the classical piece, or if it's a piano piece. I mean, piano covers a lot of ground. So what's the arrangement of the piano piece? How does that function? So point being is like when you write music, all these things start to become apparent, and yeah, the biggest thing is I think, being creative really helps understand things. If that's new to you or a little bit daunting, look at it as just like an exercise. Everybody has to go through, like, it's just like if you're a writer, you have to write to get better at writing. If you give speeches, you have to give speeches. If you're a musician, you have to write music, or you have to play for other people to get more experience, to get better. That's just the natural process of it. And you'll learn something during the course, and it might be what you least expect. Mm-hmm. That's the other cool thing about it. It's kind of a journey. So when you get in there, you start being creative, you'll discover things along the way that you might not have thought about before. So composing or writing music is another great way to use it. And that's, for me, I'm a composer, right? So basically, I use music theory as tools to help with the songwriting process in different genres. Okay, so if you guys haven't checked it out already, my album is on iTunes and Amazon and all that kind of stuff. You can check out my music. That's all composed by myself and arranged, and I played everything on that. So I learned.
Pretty cool.
Thank you, appreciate that. Now I did that project because, I knew that it was going to be a big learning experience for me. I had written a number of pieces of music before, but not to the scale that I had done. I thought I was going to finish this project in a matter of a few months, and it ended up being about 2 years. And I learned a ton. I learned a ton about the writing process, the arranging process, the performing process, the producing process. And it was a really great experience. So I encourage you guys to do the same. Write some music, and we love to hear it. And if you ever want to produce it or record it, I can help you with that as well.
So what would you do for a student who's never written a song before, and they also are about like a beginner level student who wants to write music? What would be the approach in writing music?
For sure. So here was my approach, and I feel like students that I've worked with are similar in that vein, where you kind of just play things on your instrument and you go with what you like and what sounds good. And you might not really know what you're doing, but you're just kind of following your ear, and you're following your heart and your emotions to see where it takes you. And I think that's a good place to start. I think the next thing is for somebody who's writing, generally you want to have some facility technique-wise on your instrument to begin, writing or programming. If you're going to program this in Logic, that's fine too, if you know how that works. I work with students in that as well. I would start looking at understanding what you're playing so that you can write more strategically, because what happens is if you play something that's cool and then just nothing else is coming, then you hit a wall. Because you don't know where else to go. So that's where you want to fill in the gaps with what other chords you could use, how the scale works, things like that. So you have a direction of where you can go.
Yeah.
And that's what I help coach people on.
So the more skills you have on the instrument, then you'll be able to expand on your songwriting. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, you need to expand your vocabulary.
Yeah.
If you're limited in certain areas because your vocabulary is limited. So you don't understand in depth, certain aspects of theory, or you haven't learned enough music and analyzed enough music to learn some cool stuff. So you need to expand your vocabulary, and that's what I would fill in. And just kind of, usually when I work with people in terms of writing, I throw out suggestions, or I make references to recordings. So that's another thing, is one way to write is model a piece of music that you like. You don't have to write. It's actually better if you don't know how to play the piece. If you've listened to it a lot, you just think of the concept and you go, okay, I'm going to write something similar to that conceptually. And so you use it as a model, or I'll use songs as a model. You could go from this chord to this section because it happened in this tune or this tune. So here's some examples of that. So those are ways. Yeah, I appreciate that question. How to help people with the writing process. There's a lot of different approaches you could take, but I think it's knowing methods, knowing your theory, so you always have pathways that you can go that you don't hit the wall.
Yeah.
And you just keep it moving forward.